The music stops. 80,000 voices fall silent. Michael Jackson drops his microphone. The king of pop walks to the edge of the stage. Points into the crowd. At a 17-year-old kid. Dancing alone. The Thriller beat still echoes in the boy's head. His arms move. Zombie-like. Perfect sync. Everyone around him stares. Not at the stage. At him. Michael Jackson starts walking down. Off the stage. Into the crowd. Security rushes. Fans scream. The boy doesn't notice. He's still dancing. Eyes closed. Lost in the music that isn't playing anymore. But how did we get here? How did a teenage fan stop the biggest concert of 1988? Let me take you back to the beginning of the most extraordinary night in music history. November 15, 1988. Wembley Stadium, London. The Bad World Tour had broken every record imaginable. Sold out arenas on 6 continents. But this night was different. This was Michael Jackson's final show in London, and everyone knew it. 17-year-old David Matthews had saved for 8 months to afford his ticket. Working weekends at a record shop, skipping meals, doing anything to be here. Section 47, Row K, Seat 23. He'd memorized it like a prayer. David wasn't just any fan. He'd been practicing Michael's choreography since he was 12. Hours in front of his bedroom mirror. Every twist, every glide, every signature move burned into his muscle memory. His friends called it obsession. David called it devotion. The opening act finished. Stadium lights dimmed. 80,000 people rose as one. The first chord of "Wanna Be Startin' Somethin'" exploded through the speakers. Michael Jackson appeared through a cloud of smoke and strobing lights. The crowd erupted into a sound that seemed to shake the earth itself. From his seat in the crowd, David watched in pure awe. This wasn't just a concert. This was witnessing greatness. Michael moved with an otherworldly precision, every gesture commanding absolute attention from the massive audience. Song after song, the energy built. Smooth Criminal. Beat It. Billie Jean. David sang along to every word, his voice lost in the ocean of voices around him. But then came the moment that would change everything. The familiar synthesizer notes of Thriller began to pulse through Wembley Stadium. David felt something electric surge through his body. Around him, fans swayed and cheered. But David couldn't contain himself. The music was calling to something deeper inside him. Something he'd rehearsed 1,000 times but never performed in front of anyone. He started moving. First just his shoulders, matching the rhythm perfectly. Then his arms, creating the iconic zombie movements that had made Thriller legendary. The people around him began to notice, creating a small circle as David lost himself in the choreography. He wasn't performing for them. He wasn't performing for anyone. This was pure expression, the way music was meant to be experienced. Every beat, every pause, every musical phrase translated perfectly through his body. On stage, Michael Jackson was midway through the second verse when something caught his eye. In the sea of faces, one person was moving differently. Moving with precision. Moving like him. Michael's trained eye immediately recognized the choreography. This wasn't amateur dancing. This was someone who had studied his work, understood it, lived it. The kid was hitting every mark, every transition, with professional-level accuracy. Without warning, Michael Jackson stopped singing. The backing track continued, but the voice that had filled the stadium suddenly went silent. The crowd didn't understand what was happening. 80,000 people looked around in confusion. The band kept playing, but their leader was no longer performing. Instead, he was staring intently into the crowd. Michael raised his hand, shielding his eyes from the stage lights, trying to get a clearer view of the dancing teenager. The boy was completely unaware, still moving to the music, eyes closed in concentration. Security personnel backstage began to panic. Was something wrong? Was Michael having a medical issue? The show director spoke frantically into his headset, trying to understand what was happening. But Michael Jackson was experiencing something he rarely felt anymore, genuine surprise. In 10 years of sold-out stadiums, surrounded by professional dancers and choreographers, he had forgotten what it looked like when someone truly connected with his art. Not as a performance, not as a job, but as pure passion. Subscribe now because what happens next will leave you speechless. The most spontaneous moment in concert history is about to unfold. David continued dancing, completely oblivious to the fact that the most famous person in the world was now watching his every move. The people around him had gone quiet, creating an even larger circle. Some were pointing toward the stage, trying to get David's attention, but he was lost in his own world. Michael Jackson made a decision that would break every rule of concert protocol. He handed his microphone to his backup singer and walked to the edge of the stage. The crowd near the front began screaming as they realized what was happening. Michael Jackson was leaving his platform, descending into their world. Stage security moved quickly to create a path, but Michael gestured for them to stay back. He wanted to do this alone. The walk from the stage to section 47 took nearly 3 minutes. 3 minutes of 80,000 people watching the king of pop move through the crowd like an ordinary person. Fans reached out to touch him, but he kept his focus on one destination. David was still dancing when the crowd around him began to part. He opened his eyes to see what was happening and froze mid-movement. Michael Jackson stood 5 feet away, smiling. "Don't stop," Michael said, barely audible over the crowd noise. "Keep dancing." David's mouth fell open. This couldn't be real. This had to be a dream. But Michael Jackson nodded encouragingly and began clapping to the beat that was still playing throughout the stadium. Slowly, shakily, David resumed the choreography. But now he was performing it directly in front of his idol. Every movement felt magnified, every step carried the weight of a lifetime of practice. Michael watched intently, occasionally nodding his approval when David nailed a particularly difficult transition. The crowd around them had formed a natural amphitheater, everyone straining to witness this impossible moment. When the song reached the breakdown section, something magical happened. Michael Jackson began dancing alongside David, right there in the crowd. 2 generations of dancers, separated by fame and fortune but united by the universal language of music. The stadium erupted. This wasn't part of any script or planned performance. This was pure, unrehearsed humanity. But this is where the story gets truly incredible. What happened next would become legend. As the final notes of Thriller echoed through Wembley, Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his iconic black fedora hat. The same hat he'd worn in countless music videos, the hat that had become synonymous with his image. Without hesitation, he placed it on David's head. The teenager's knees nearly buckled. 80,000 people witnessed Michael Jackson pass on a piece of his legacy to a kid who simply loved dancing. But Michael wasn't finished. He took David's hand and led him back through the crowd toward the stage. The walk that had taken 3 minutes now took 10, as fans reached out just to touch both figures passing by. When they reached the stage, Michael helped David climb up onto the platform. The backup dancers made room as the king of pop positioned his young fan center stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael announced, his voice echoing through the PA system, "this young man just reminded me why we make music. For moments like this. For the pure love of it." The crowd's roar was deafening. Michael signaled to his band, and they began playing Thriller again. But this time, David danced on the stage of Wembley Stadium, wearing Michael Jackson's fedora, performing for 80,000 people. Share this video if you believe in the magic of music. Subscribe to see more stories that prove art can change lives in an instant. When the song ended, Michael Jackson embraced David like a father would embrace his son. He whispered something in the teenager's ear that only David would ever know. Then he gestured for David to keep the hat. "This belongs to you now," Michael said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. David Matthews walked off that stage a different person. Not because he'd met a celebrity, but because he'd experienced what it meant when art transcends all boundaries, social, economic, cultural, and connects two souls through shared passion. The hat became David's most treasured possession. He never sold it, never displayed it publicly. Instead, he kept it as a reminder that sometimes, when we pour our hearts into something we love, the universe notices. Years later, David would become a professional choreographer, working with artists around the world. He would tell the story of that night to his students, using it to teach them that technique is important, but genuine passion is everything. Michael Jackson passed away in 2009, but the memory of that November evening lives on. In interviews throughout the years, band members and crew from that tour would say it was the most spontaneous, beautiful moment they'd ever witnessed on stage. The video footage from that night became legendary among Michael Jackson fans. Not for the elaborate production or pyrotechnics, but for the 3 minutes when the world's biggest superstar showed us all what it means to be human. That black fedora still sits on David Matthews' shelf, a tangible reminder that dreams can come true in the most unexpected ways. Not through connections or luck, but through pure, undiluted love of the craft. Subscribe, share, and remember, sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from simply being yourself. Michael Jackson noticed David because his dancing was authentic. In a world of performance and pretense, authenticity shines brightest of all. And sometimes, just sometimes, the king of pop stops his show to crown a new prince. The music industry would never see another Michael Jackson. But that night at Wembley, we saw something even rarer. We saw the moment when art chooses its next guardian. What happened in the following weeks became even more extraordinary. Word of Michael's spontaneous gesture spread through the music industry like wildfire. MTV requested interviews with David, but he declined them all. He wasn't interested in fame, he just wanted to dance. But Michael Jackson hadn't forgotten about his young fan. 3 weeks after the Wembley concert, David received a package at his home in North London. Inside was a handwritten letter from Michael, along with a VHS tape of the complete Thriller music video, but this wasn't any ordinary copy. Michael had recorded a personal message at the beginning of the tape. "David," his voice said, "you reminded me that night that music isn't about the stage lights or the crowd noise. It's about the connection between the artist and the art. Keep that spirit alive." But there was more. The package also contained choreography notes in Michael's own handwriting, detailed breakdowns of moves from Thriller, Beat It, and Smooth Criminal. These weren't just dance steps, they were masterclasses from the king of pop himself. David would later discover that Michael had asked his team to track down the teenager's address. In an era before social media, this required genuine effort and intention. Michael could have let that magical moment remain just a memory, but he chose to nurture what he had witnessed. The impact on David's life was immediate and lasting. His dance teacher at the local community center noticed an incredible transformation. David's movements had gained a confidence and fluidity that couldn't be taught, only experienced. He began teaching younger students, passing on not just Michael's choreography, but the philosophy behind it. Dance like no one's watching, but always be ready for someone who truly understands, David would tell his students, paraphrasing advice from Michael's letter. In 1991, David auditioned for a backup dancer position on Janet Jackson's tour. When Janet learned about his connection to her brother, she hired him immediately. "Michael called me personally," she told David. "He said you had something special. He's never made a call like that before." David toured with Janet for 2 years, performing on stages around the world. But he never forgot the lesson from that night at Wembley: authenticity trumps everything else. While other dancers tried to copy Michael's moves perfectly, David developed his own style, inspired by Michael but uniquely his own. The black fedora remained David's most treasured possession, but it also became a teaching tool. He would bring it to workshops and masterclasses, using it to tell the story of how passion recognized and rewarded passion. Students would hold the hat, feeling its weight, understanding that it represented more than memorabilia. It was a symbol of what becomes possible when we pursue our art with complete dedication. When Michael Jackson passed away in 2009, David was among the thousands who gathered outside Neverland Ranch. But he didn't come to mourn a celebrity. He came to honor a mentor who had changed his life with a single gesture of recognition. At the memorial service, David was invited to speak. He stood before an audience that included music industry legends, celebrities, and dignitaries. In his hand, he held the black fedora. "This hat taught me that greatness isn't about being famous," David said, his voice steady but emotional. "It's about recognizing greatness in others and nurturing it." Michael saw something in a 17-year-old kid dancing in the crowd, and he chose to celebrate it rather than ignore it. David placed the hat on the podium and stepped back. "Michael once told me this belonged to me. But I think it belongs to everyone who has ever dared to dance like no one's watching. It belongs to the part of us that Michael saw that night, the part that believes in the transformative power of music." Today, David Matthews runs one of London's most respected dance academies. The black fedora sits in a place of honor in his office, not behind glass, but on a simple wooden stand where students can see it every day. Above it hangs a framed photo from that night at Wembley. Michael and David on stage together, frozen in a moment of pure artistic connection. The Academy's motto, painted on the wall in large letters, reads, "Dance with your heart, and the world will notice." Every year on November 15th, the anniversary of that magical night, David holds a free workshop for young dancers. The only requirement is that they perform with genuine passion. At the end of each session, he tells the story of the night when being authentically yourself changed everything. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us why music matters. Hit that notification bell, and remember, keep dancing, because you never know who might be watching.